today we will talk about cybersecurity from a galactic viewpoint, which is actually a talk, webinar about cybersecurity for non-developers. You will see why this is important. So in the first slide, before we go for the first slide, let me start with some really like introduction about what this will be all about. As you may have seen in the news or in certain Hollywood movies, everyone thinks about hacking and cybersecurity as some kind of magic, while we all know that a bunch of systems are getting hacked continuously. And as I said, despite the public perception, hacking is not really like in Hollywood, you know, characters are flowing on the screen and all of a sudden somebody is in the system and breaks in the system. But what you will see that cybersecurity and all the incidents, all the consequences of cyber insecurity are actually byproducts of engineering faults. Most of them can be dragged down to one mistake that some of the software developers, some of the engineers did somewhere when doing the development, the coding. So this is a different type of human error than the user error, but it's still a human error at the end of the day. So the current situation in the domain of cybersecurity is that we are actually separating the development from the security stuff, both in time. Most probably this is more relevant for like 10 years back. We had development and security as an add-on. I have the feeling that this has changed a lot in the last 10 years, but still today we have a separation in roles, saying that we have developers and then we have security experts. Now, this is what I would like to change. We would like to change at Sidereal, making sure that everyone understands that there is no separation. So basically, developers should have a security mindset. Talking about developers, so the typical setup is that developer has a specification and then the developer implements whatever should be implemented, right? At the moment it works, the developer thinks, okay, I'm ready because it works. And that is one of the biggest problems. So we then start securing it, or we then start dealing with security by, for example, naming certain security champions who are responsible for the security of those software products. So this is what I mean by separating roles instead of having security and development in one single one single person. So this is pretty much inherent in the process. There will be unavoidable painful iterations, like we will have to test the system, we will have to fix those errors, we will sometimes even have to go back and redesign the system. So this is not really good. And by doing this, the only thing we can do is to hope that there will be no residual problems, loopholes, mistakes. So to cut it very shortly, one of the cores of the problem is that we see quality as an attribute of a system very important. And we may also, or we started to see security as an attribute of a system, which is pretty much important. But basically, if you think about it, at the end of the day, security and quality are not two different things. Security is basically a quality defect. Security defect is basically a quality defect. And this is for the introduction. First of all, the problem we are tackling. First of all, what is security? What does it mean to be secure? And if you think about the English language, basically it distinguishes between two words, safety and security. Now, if you think about Swedish or Finnish language, I don't speak, but I know turvallisuus and I know säkerhet. Both of these two words are translate to both safety and security, aren't they? So the interesting question is, the English language does distinguish between these two, while most of the languages, actually, it's not a speciality of the Swedish or the Finnish language. Most of the languages in the world do not. So what is then the difference between safety and security? Because it's important to understand that we are talking about cyber security and not cyber safety. So they are not synonyms. They do mean different things. And to put it in a very, very simple way, when we talk about safety problems in general for transportation, for example, or for even software, we are talking about accidental incidents, things that happen by chance, things that happen due to the mother nature, things that happen according to to Murphy's laws, if you know what I mean. As opposed to this, security is actually something which is always connected to an intentional and usually malicious act, hacking, attacking. So these incidents are intentional, and they are done by hackers, by attackers who want to make you harm. So this is their intention. They have a pretty good motivation to hack those systems, to make you harm, to do whatever they want to do. So the next question is, of course, what is the motivation? And then you see here in lilac the image about the study which revealed that 41% of the motivation, so 41% of the incidents, the motivation behind is ransom. So they just want to make money. Then insider threats, an ex-colleague or a colleague who is not really happy at wherever he is, then some of these hackers want to push through some political message, or you might be hacked by the competition. So there are many different aspects of what motivates the hackers to hack, to make you harm or to attack your systems. Another very important aspect about security is whenever we are talking about security, we are talking about the future. So security is preparing for the future. When we say we are secure at the moment, it does not mean that we are not being attacked, so that we are not under attack. Being secure means to be prepared for future attacks, to be prepared for the future. And this is what makes it a challenging thing to handle, because you basically have to foresee the future. You have to foresee the future, and based on what do you do this? Based on your past experience, and each and every of us has a different past experience. So how we see the future is a tricky thing. Specifically for companies, when it comes to the future of a company, dealing with security means to prevent costly and usually brand damaging cybersecurity incidents, getting out of the news, not to get into the news, because if you are hacked, people or newspapers or portals will write about it, and that may ruin your reputation. So dealing with security is a proactive step to mitigate the risk. So basically we have threats, we have undesired events that we don't want to happen, and we associate risk to them, which is nothing else than a matrix measuring the risk, measuring this threat based on the likelihood that it will happen and the damage it will cause. So the more likely a threat is, so we should say, okay, it may most probably happen, then the risk is higher, as well as if the damage is higher when the threat actually is realized, so then when this undesired event happens, then also the risk goes up. So it's basically the product, if you like, of the likelihood and the damage, and that is what risk is. So we are facing risk continuously. We have to assess those risks, and let's see how these risks look like when it comes to companies. These images are from the Allianz Risk Barometer 2020, so the latest release. And on the left side, you can see that for businesses, this study revealed that for businesses, the number one threat, the number one risk as they see it as of today is cyber incidents. So many companies are aware of the fact that cyber incidents may influence in a bad way, of course, their businesses. The second, and that is also important, that the second position in the list with 37% is business interruption. But if you look at the chart on the bottom right corner, you see that even within business interruption, the most common cause, as managers see it related to the risk they are taking, are cyber incidents. So the first First position in this top list is cyber incidents, and the second position is business interruption. But even within business interruption, 55% of people think that cyber incidents are those that may influence business interruption the best. The other interesting thing related to cybersecurity and cyber incidents is that most of the businesses also reported that this is the most underestimated risk that they know about. So they underestimate this because they may not understand what this risk is all about, or for different reasons. So it is least understood because many people think that they will not be attacked, while in reality incidents are much more likely than you might think. And in most cases, we might say that the consequences are basically as severe as you might think. So just think about the consequences. On short term, if you are hacked, if your system is hacked, if some data is stolen from you, credentials, even worse, credit card numbers, then you will have to pay in fines. Just think about GDPR. You will have to pay, in some cases, a lot of money as a fine. You may lose new businesses, you may lose revenue due to this. And these are the direct short-term consequences. But on longer term, it is even more painful consequence that you will lose reputation. You will lose trust in your products or in your services. And that's something that can really, really influence badly the business. So that's what is connected to the thing I already mentioned, like getting out of the news, not getting into the news as a company that has been hacked again and again and again. So this is what is happening to many companies out there, and this is what everyone is realizing these days. What are the typical responses to these risks from businesses or from the leaders, from the managers' point of view? So some specific cybersecurity issues, we have a typical response saying, okay, but we are not big players out there, so why would we deal with security? Nobody would be willing to attack us. We are not a juicy target, so we are flying under the radar. So why would anyone attack our systems or us? Now, just think about, I don't know if you have heard about the Zoom story lately. Zoom had really huge number of security incidents as the pandemic started earlier this year. And what happened to Zoom is, so the story is like when they were a startup, they were a smaller startup, they thought, okay, we can just ignore security, we focus on user experience, we focus on functionality, and that's okay. Once we are big, we will fix all the security issues later on, because we now focus on something else, which is we want to get on the market, we want to have customers quickly, so we focus on functionality and user experience. But this was a debt that they had to pay off at the beginning of 2020. Why? Because of the pandemic, they started to grow pretty quickly. So all of a sudden, everyone started to use Zoom or some other remote presentation services. And at that moment, they started to fly high and everyone started to shoot at them. This is pretty much normal human behavior. So Zoom became popular, and popularity always attracts attackers or researchers, white hat or black hat attackers. So a huge number of incidents, a huge number of vulnerabilities have been revealed to Zoom, and it's still questionable whether it was too, and then of course they started to deal with security, but it's still, the future will tell whether it was too late or not for them. So don't think that you are not a target. Second typical response, we are already spending far too much on protecting our IT assets, so why we should invest even more? Now, this spending far too much is an interesting question. A former FBI director, William Webster, said once, security is always too much until the day it is not enough. So all of a sudden, you may realize that all the money you have spent was not enough because something happened and you didn't think about it, you didn't take that into account. So this is really a tricky thing. So another aspect of what is enough and what is not enough related to spending is of course, it's pretty much, you might think that it's pretty much subjective, like, do I feel that I'm spending too much on security or not? A very well-known model is called the Gordon-Loeb model, which basically tells you, based on some mathematics in the background, that you should maximize the investment into information security at 37% of the predicted loss. So basically the risk. You have to have a good estimation of the risk. And then once you express the risk in terms of money, so this is the amount of money we are risking by the current threats that we have and the likelihoods and the damages, then they say that the optimum or the maximum of the spending should be 37% of this, just to give you some nice numbers here. And then some others. Can we start with basics? So once you realize that you have a problem, because at the stage one, you don't even realize that you have a problem. If you have already realized that you have a problem, you start dealing with it, which means, for example, assigning security champions to the issue, and which roles you give to these security champions does matter. So this is a very interesting question, like security champions should do what, right? But anyway, start with the basics after realizing the problem, that you have a problem. And then the next level, because these are also kind of levels, the next level of dealing with the problem is kind of realizing that even if I spend certain amounts of money to security, even if I, do whatever I should do in the organization to cope with the problem, it's never going to be 100% secure. This is unfortunately a common understanding, that there is no such thing as 100% security. You simply cannot make your systems to be 100% secure. This is a cat and mouse game that is going on and on and on for some 30 to 40 years now, and we don't even see its end. It may even never end. So this is also a very interesting aspect of cybersecurity, that there is no such thing as a 100% secure system. And then as the highest level, on the highest level, you start acting and implementing a systematic and programmatic solution for the cybersecurity problems. Now, my wife is a psychologist, and when she saw this list, she said, well, this is pretty much in line with the 5 stages of loss. So the first is denial. Why I would be hacked? Then the second is anger. Okay, I'm angry because I already am spending too much money on defending or protecting my IT assets. Then bargaining. Okay, can we do something here, but not too much? Still, can we get away with doing some basic stuff? Then depression. Well, no way we can win this war. And then, of course, acceptance and the reality. Okay, let's do something about it. The best we can do. Let's look at the numbers. Let's estimate the risk, and let's see what are the best practices, what others are doing in this domain. So 5 stages of loss or 5 stages of grief are pretty much in line with these typical responses. So this is the situation today. Now let's see what this systematic and balanced approach would be on the highest level, when we have this acceptance and accept this is the reality, and we have to be smart in dealing with all these issues in our organization. The image that you see here is made by us. This is really the cybersecurity from galactic viewpoint. So this is the great arena, the great cybersecurity universe, where we have enlisted all the domains, all the building blocks of a cybersecurity at an organization, enlisting the most important activities that people do. You have in your organization, or you may have in your organizations, security management, dealing with legal and governance related things. Then you may have certain plans related to incident response. So what do we do if something bad happens? You may have network security, firewalls, antivirus software, intrusion detection systems. You may have a team which deals with security of the operations, like SecOps, critical infrastructure security, securing the critical infrastructure, the databases, the servers, introducing virtualization, and so on and so on. And you have AppSec in the middle. Now, as you can guess, even in this webinar, we will be focusing on AppSec. what is the interesting thing about AppSec? It's about software security. It's about dealing with the security of the development process, dealing with the security of your output, your outcome, which is software if you are developing software. It's all about secure design, secure implementation of this according to the specification, testing for security, and so on and so on. The thing is that if you think about your budget and that you are spending on security at your organizations, you might realize, it's not necessarily true, of course, but at many companies, you might realize that most of the budget is actually spent on antivirus, on firewalls, on intrusion detection, on setting up certain plans for business recovery or disaster recovery, on legal stuff and things like that. But at the end of the day, all of these things are actually consequences, and the root cause that basically introduces software security problems into our lives is AppSec, because it's in most cases the fact that the system can be hacked, as I started off from, is a consequence of an engineering mistake done by some of the engineers, either during the design or the implementation, or maybe it was a faulty, a weak testing. But in most of the cases, AppSec is the root cause of the cybersecurity problems, and all the rest is just the consequences. And we have a pretty much imbalance, usually at many companies, we have a pretty big imbalance here, that money is spent on the consequences and the focus is not actually on the application security, like doing it right. Implementing those systems with security in mind. So the recommendation from my side is that you have to find the right balance between tackling the root cause and tackling, of course, the consequences. You need systematic approach. You need a systematic and balanced approach in securing your systems. And I'm not saying with this that you don't have to deal with SecOps or network security, or you don't have to have an incident response. But I think that in general, the software development community, or better to say the IT security community, is not focusing enough on AppSec. So balanced and systematic approach. Let's deep dive a little bit into the software development, and let's see what does that exactly mean when I say that many of the security incidents are basically consequences of engineering mistakes. So yes, incidents are consequences. We can even put it in a very simple way when it comes to coding. Many of these incidents are basically consequences of bugs. These are those bugs that can be exploited by the bad guys. And you have the Murphy's law of coding, which says that each piece of code, each system has exactly 5 bugs. Funny. So each system has exactly 5 bugs, and this number does not depend on how many bugs you have already found. Of course, this is a Murphy law, but the situation is more or less like this. There will always be bugs in the systems that we develop. And given that I said that all the incidents are consequences of these bugs, you can simply deduce that there is no way you can get rid of all the bugs. This is pretty much simple, and it's according to the Murphy's law that we have just seen. So we can quite easily deduce that, unfortunately, there is no such thing as 100% security. There will always be some security holes in your systems. The question is whether the attackers are motivated or not to attack you. I also, so this pretty much sounds apocalyptic, I know, but this is the common understanding. No such thing as 100% security. I also have some good news for you, luckily. Several studies done by Gartner, by Microsoft, by some of the antivirus companies, who all have large databases of incidents that happened in the wild. Surprisingly, all of these studies came up with more or less the same number, 90%, 90%. What they say is that what they revealed with these studies is that 90% of security incidents that happened in the wild resulted from mistakes, engineering mistakes, bugs, which we already knew about for long. We already know about for long. what is the most important message from all this? If we learn to follow the best practices, and there is a huge number of best practices out there, we can get rid of 90% of security incidents. And that is something which is worthwhile investing in, right? So we will never reach 100% security in with our systems, but if we learn how to do it right, if we teach our developers how to do it right, have them educated on secure coding, there is a good chance in theory that we reach 90% of security, and there will always be a residual 10%. But that's good. Moreover, many leaders, many managers ask me, okay, so we will deal with security, but how much will it cost? How much more resources do we need for that? And the good thing related to secure coding and developing code with security in mind, that in many cases, this is not an overhead. This is simply about shifting the mindset of developers, making them to code a little bit differently, not more, but differently. And it's all about coding habits, all about basically being paranoid or making developers paranoid, showing them what will happen with their code if there will be certain security related bugs and problems in their code. And once they see it, they will understand it right away, and that will frighten them enough to shift their coding habits to the positive way. Going back a little bit to business and going back a little bit to governing all this at an organization, we have a famous quote from Bruce Schneier, who is, if there is such a thing as celebrity in the domain of security and cybersecurity, well, Bruce Schneier is a very well-known guy from here, from this domain. He said that goal is not even to have 100% perfect security, because I just said it's no way we can have that, but rather adequate security at a reasonable cost. So there is an optimum of the spending, which I already mentioned, the Gordon-Loeb model, which can help you finding this optimum. So adequate level of security at a reasonable cost. So don't spend too much, but don't spend too low amount of money as well. A little bit of excursion to game theory, which is also an important thing for leaders. We cannot win the war against the bad guys. We cannot win this war against the dark side. We cannot have 100% secure systems. So instead of beating the enemy, which you can't, the goal here is not to win or to lose, or it's not the nature of the game, but the goal here is simply to stay in the game. So you have zero-sum games, and this is not a zero-sum game. This is an infinite game, where typically the nature of the game is to stay in it. And cybersecurity is typically such. Now then, again, deep diving further into development and the work of developers. So how developers work. What makes them to develop something? We always start off from certain from a specification, which is based on the user requirements, saying, okay, we need a system that will do this and that. So the specification is written down 100, 150 pages, and it tells to developers what should be implemented. And now what they will implement is usually something like this. Unfortunately, it never covers perfectly the specification. So coding is not trivial. Coding implementation of software is pretty complex thing. It can be pretty complex. And developers do their best to implement the code covering the specification. But they will never cover it perfectly. And of course, we will always have certain extra functionality in the code, which is not in the specification. It's completely outside of the specification. Nobody told them that the system should not work like that, but it works as it has been implemented. So typically, we have functional problems in the areas where the implementation does not cover the specification. And these are things that we usually handle. So this is what testing focuses on, to find findings, to find bugs or problems where the implementation does not cover the specification, when the implementation does not work, so when the system does not work as intended. And a bit of simplified model, of course, but we can state that Potential security problems are in the domain where the implementation is outside of the specification. Nobody told the developer not to implement the system like that. These are kind of byproducts of the best effort the developers made to cover this implementation, the specification in the implementation. And of course, it is a misbelief that programmers know about all this. So this is, on one hand, as I already said, a simplified model, but also this is a model which pretty much explains on a very, very high level the problem with security. Our focus is always on functional problems, and we forget to test the system, or we forget the developers to be aware of the fact that their implementation can do something else as well. So they may not even know about some of these tricks. They may not be aware of these things. They may not have up-to-date skills, and they may not have practice, everyday practice, to deal with these legs of this blue octopus in the right way. So one of the most obvious things that a developer should do in these cases is to cut off the legs of the octopus, saying, okay, whatever comes from, because you cannot code in a way that it perfectly covers. So the business logic will never perfectly cover the specification. But the thing you can do is to reject certain functions or to reject certain inputs so that they don't reach the business logic of the code. So this is all about defensive programming, and these are all the wrong assumptions the developer have, saying, this input is a username, so we don't have to deal really with the username because username cannot be a buffer of 4 gigabytes. But in reality, sometimes the username can be a buffer of 4 gigabytes, and that can crash the application, that can cause many different undesired consequences from this domain. So as I said, this is a pretty much simplified model of security and cybersecurity in the domain of software, but it's a good model because it tells you this duality between specification, implementation, what is covered, what is not covered, and in this way, it gives you a lot of insights into how to deal with security when it comes to development. Now, a little bit of consequences of all this. As I said, many of the incidents are consequences of bugs. Developers in many cases are not prepared for these bugs. They are prepared for other types of bugs which cause security, which cause functional problems, but they don't. Their focus is quite scarcely, quite rarely on security issues. Let's see some numbers. Let's see some statistics. The estimate is that there are actually around 25 million programmers, professional developers out there. The number ranges from something like 23.9 million to 26.4 million. I've seen several studies here, but more or less it's 25 million programmers. Prediction is that this number will reach 45 million by 2030. So by 2030, we will have 45 million programmers developing code out there. A quick study that we did, I have never seen some sources of information related to this, but simply based on our customers and multinational or smaller or medium enterprises at which we have already taught, we already had secure coding trainings at, our quick study revealed, by looking at how many developers are there and how many of them have been educated, we revealed that it's more or less 1% of developers out there who may have been educated to secure coding practices and skills. So the situation is pretty bad from this point of view. So 99% of developers most probably do not follow the best practices, those best practices which are otherwise out there, right? So lack of skills, lack of practice, lack of security mindset at developers unavoidably leads to human mistakes, and that unavoidably leads to all those security incidents that we can read about in the news. So the situation is not really good these days. It's improving, of course. We have seen some improve in the last years, but we are still not there. as you can see from the numbers. Another very important and interesting thing related to secure coding is that the application as a product of the coding discipline or the coding itself is as secure as the weakest link in the team. So just imagine you have a team of 10 developers and 9 of them are pretty much prepared. They have attended the secure coding class and they know how to do it right. They are already equipped with all those best practices and they are already paranoid enough to code securely, to code right from security point of view. And you have one single guy who is a junior developer who has never heard about security problems. Now the problem is that this one single guy will keep producing bad modules or bad code, even though 9 out of 10 of these developers would not. But for security incident to happen, it's enough for the bad guys to find one single exploitable bug. So it is the average preparedness of all of your developers that really counts when it comes to securing your product. And that's why we like to say that security is a team sport, just like hockey, right? Security is a team sport and everyone should take their part in developing themselves so that they stop producing unsecure and bad code, so that they stop producing security relevant bugs. So you need talent and the equipment and the practicing they can get from educating themselves on these best practices. As I say, it's the sources of information are out there. Trainings are available, of course. You just have to do it. It's all about the mindset and all about the code hygiene, as we call it, secure coding literacy also. More and more organizations are actually realizing this. So more and more organizations start to deal with security and educating software engineers on secure coding practices. Many of these companies that we see out there start to allocate, let's put it in this way, resources to security, let's say by naming certain security champions in the development teams who are responsible for security of the whole team. But just to repeat once again, which role, what would be the task of these security champions is a good question. Definitely they cannot be just responsible as single persons for the security of the whole stuff or the whole development project. In certain lines of businesses, in certain sectors, industries, we have also seen a shift that they make it mandatory for developers to deal with security. If any of you are working in with credit cards, so work in the payment card industry, you should know about payment card industry's data security standards, the famous PCI DSS. Now that standard is a mandatory standard for anyone working with credit card numbers, and it prescribes annual training of developers on secure coding, which is pretty good because it also realizes that secure coding is not a skill that you can just once learn and that's it, but it really needs continuous dealing with the issue, continuously following the best practices, continuously following the incidents so that you know the trends out there. So we basically foresee a future where many other industries will take over this approach and many other companies will also take over this approach. And all this will be elevated to the level of certification, as well as I just said, continuous learning and readiness measures to keep up the attention of developers to the importance of secure coding. So security can be achieved by developing secure coding literacy. We can also call this secure coding literacy, which, as I said, vast majority of developers lack at the moment. And it's all about instead of learning how to code, because developers already know how to code, it's all about learning how not to code. And this is a really funny formulation of what secure coding is all about. It's all about how not to code. And as I said, the most important aspect of this on a very, very high level, besides, of course, above the level of getting skills and practices for developers, is to make them paranoid, showing them what can happen so that they know that they have to shift their mindset and develop new coding habits. And a little bit about the solution, which I already mentioned, is education. So educating developers is the most efficient way of shifting this mindset of developers towards security and secure coding literacy. And as I said, we are providing these courses for Finland and for Sweden together with Informator and Tieturi. We at Sidereal, we have all of the trainers have at least more than 10 years of experience in teaching software security to developers. So we know how they perceive this, how they should be persuaded to take over these best practices. And we have developed this approach, didactical approach, if you like, which consists of 4 steps, 4 stages. First, we show them a problem like SQL injection or buffer overflow. If we would stop there, however, developers would say, understood, okie dokie, I see the point. But believe me, once they get back to their desks, they will be stressed again. They will start focusing on the functionality again, and they will tend to forget about what they have learned. So this is why, as the second stage, we always also show them hacking techniques. We show them, okay, but look, if your code stays like this, this is what will happen with your code. This is not to turn people to the dark side, right? Because this is basically teaching hacking, but this is not for the purpose of turning them to hackers, turning them to the dark side. But this is more to frighten them, to raise their level of paranoia, because believe me, developers want to develop themselves. They want to advance in this domain. And once you see them, I see in their eyes like, ooh, okay, now I got the point why SQL injection is important. Now I got the point why buffer overflow is important, when they see the consequences of the insecure code. And now, once you have the attention of developers by showing them hacking techniques, then they are pretty much responsive, and they are pretty much accepting the best practices, and they really will remember the best practices. So this is how the best practices will be burnt into their minds. And what is also important in our didactical approach is that we are presenting people also real life case studies, so that they can feel that this is something that can happen to you, because this is something that happened to this or that or the other company, like Zoom, like Twitter, like I don't know, Ashley Madison, like even Google or Facebook. So all of these systems have been written by people, and those developers also made some mistakes. So this is good. And also, if a certain development groups comes from a certain line of business, then we also tend to show them case studies, real life incidents from their specific domain, from their specific industry. So for PCI DSS or for financial sector, we show case studies like Equifax or the Swedish Stock Exchange integer overflow problem from a couple of years ago, and so on, so that they can really feel that this is something which can happen to us. The courses are, of course, highly hands-on, so you cannot teach secure coding without showing people code. So people work extensively with code. We show them hacking techniques. We show them how the website or how an application can be hacked, and then we also show them how it should be fixed. And these are 2 different kinds of labs that we have. So we first show them a hacking lab, and then we show them source code fixing lab, when they really work in the source code. For this, we have developed an educational technology which is called Sidereal Sergeant. And this is a chatbot which is embedded into the IDE. I don't know if you are familiar with IDEs like IntelliJ IDEA for Java, Visual Studio Code in general, Visual Studio for C#, and so on and so on. So we have we have developed a plugin for all these tools, where within the IDE, within the natural habitat of developers, they get instructions about what is to be done in these labs. The course catalog covers C, C++, Java, C#, Python for the moment, but we are continuously extending the number of the covered programming languages. But basically, these are the 4 or 5 most popular programming languages out there. For Finnish participants, you see here the website of Tieturi at tieturi.fi, where you can find the course catalog, the courses for your developers. For Swedish participants, you can turn to Informator at informator.se, and you can find their specific, typically 3-day courses covering these programming languages, covering both web application and non-web application topics, as well as some of the courses focusing on developers, some of the courses focusing on how to find these vulnerabilities are for testers audience. Yeah, and that would be it.